All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you!
This is my boomstick!
What's your favorite scary movie?
What's up, horror heads, and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa.
And this week, we are doing one of the newer movies that we've done. It's been a little bit since we've got to this new movie that's only about a year old. We're going to be doing The Nighthouse. This one was one that I just happened to turn on HBO one day, and it was like, hey, this is new. You might want to check this out. And I read the description. Seemed real cool. Was getting a lot of praise online. And so went ahead and clicked it. And I mean, we went ahead, we put it on the list. I'm pretty good with it. There was a lot that happened in this movie.
Yes, there was.
Like in what didn't seem like a very long span of time. And so, I mean, we're just going to get to it because there's definitely a lot to talk about with this movie. So there is a lot of subtext here, and we're going to get to theories and subtext and all of that. But before we get to that, Dave, I just want to know, like, what's your overall feeling for this? There's this newer subgenre of horror that seems to be just a 2-hour-long psychological mind fuck, and then Act 3 happens and all of the shit hits the fan, right? Like Hereditary or some of those others that we've done. So, did this film, were you happy with it, or when it's over, were you just kind of scratching your head? Like, how'd you feel about it?
I don't know if this approached the subgenre of what has been referred to as elevated horror. I think that it flirted with elevated horror, and I think it did so tastefully. Interestingly, and go with me on this, because it certainly doesn't feel like it. And even watching the trailer, even after watching the movie, I'm going to say this, and I feel like I'm crazy for saying this, but I get major Insidious vibes from this movie.
Okay.
In that there's something, and then there's something else, and these two things are like almost so distantly related that you're like, how the fuck did we get here?
Right.
And yet it works.
Yeah.
Because this movie has the possibility of being a couple different things. And I think even though that's not clarified, that ambiguity might work for it. Right. I still haven't decided if it works for it or against it. What I do know is that no matter what the intended outcome of this movie is, I like it.
Right.
I really did enjoy it. And what's more, I think it's a really well-made movie. Like, there are some shots here that are framed so beautifully. The tension is palpable in this movie. The idea of like this waking sleep that our heroine is experiencing, and Rebecca Hall, I think, just absolutely killed it in this movie as Beth. She was so damn good. I mean, truthfully, all the actors I think were good. On a technical level, this movie, I think, succeeds in just about every possible way. And that's one of those things that kept me engrossed. I was only planning on watching the first half of this movie and then come back and watch the second half of the movie the next day. And that didn't happen. I just kept watching. I was like, I gotta see what's going on here. And so I think if you ask me today, you ask me tomorrow, you ask me a week from now, is this a good movie? Did you like this movie? I would say, yeah, I think this is a really good movie, and I think I really like this movie.
Yeah, this movie I had a weird roller coaster with this movie because it started off and things were weird and wonky and wild, and I was like, okay, like I'm along for this ride. And then somewhere in the middle, I thought that I'd figured it out, and I started to like catch this wave of disappointment because I was like, shit, I get it. I know what they're doing here, and they're just going to get to the end, and I'm going to be kind of sad that I figured it out, right? That they didn't. And then they got to the end, and I had figured it out kind of, but I still liked it. They did a lot of really cool things with this. You're right. Just aesthetically, this movie is fucking gorgeous. It is just beautiful. These huge sweeping shots of the lake and just clouds and just these amazing, sometimes the shots that just look like still frames that are just so beautiful. And you're constantly, you always kind of feel like you just don't understand quite enough. And then, like I said, then I got to a point where I was disappointed because I thought I understood too much. Like I was like, oh, they buried the lead too much with that. But they still got me with some of the stuff. So one thing about this movie that I really enjoyed that I ended up kind of getting into today was some of the musical stuff, because that one song it just kept all day long, and like I couldn't even remember the words to it, right? So I eventually
the gale across.
That's the one. And so today I literally Googled that song from the Nighthouse when I discovered that it was the Calvary Cross, which when you go to read the lyrics for it is a haunting song.
Yeah,
it is. And so then I was immediately like, well, now I want to know a little bit more. Right. So I went on this like bizarre little deep dive into the music. And it turns out that like the guy who, the composer for it, his name is Ben Lovett. And so he had also worked on The Ritual with David Bruckner. And so they had this idea. He gets to use Calvary Cross, but then things get really weird because he took the three chords from Calvary Cross, and he created what's called a negative harmony, which is essentially like a shadow version of a song. And then all of the scoring is based on that being twisted in different ways that match the manic and depressive moments that Beth is having. And I was floored by that, to find out that one, that song was super creepy, and that two, he kind of twisted it up like that. I mean, so this was one where as I read more and more into it, I found more things to like, and it wasn't that I ever disliked it. So did I scratch my head a little bit? Yeah. And like you said, you have to come to terms with ambiguity sometimes. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I do think that the storyline ambiguity that we're going to get into, I think that it makes this movie better. I think that it works real well with it. And yeah, tomorrow you ask me, I think I liked it a lot. I'm not settled on a number for the end yet, but I do feel comfortable saying I really liked it.
And I think part of that ambiguity, not part of it, I mean, we're talking like 90% of this ambiguity,
right,
is nothing. Right? What is the nothing that her husband, Owen, right, that he leaves in that note? Nothing is after you. And she tells her friend Claire, who I thought was played brilliantly
by Kristen Bell.
Yes, I was like, man, she looks like Kristen Bell, which is one hell of a compliment, because she's a smoke show. I've never seen Sarah Goldberg is the actress's name. I've never seen her in anything else, but she was fantastic in this movie.
Yeah,
as the like oh so concerned friend. So I when she like reveals to her, she was like, I lied. I do know what it is that he's talking about. Nothing is there all along. And I love that play on words, right? Beth is haunted after Owen's suicide, right? And as with anything, right, you have to kind of come to terms with this, and doing that means that she comes face to face with this like dark life that he had, a life she didn't know anything about, right? Which starts with just seeing a picture of someone who seems to be but is not her,
right,
on his cell phone, right? So there's two ways that this story can go, right? There is the supernatural angle where nothing is kind of representative of death itself, right? Almost in the what's this movie series, Final Destination, right? Almost like Final Destination, right? And then there's the other road that it can take, where nothing is more ethereal, and it's this sort of like depression that she has, right? Whether it is grief that she's feeling, or whether it is the coming to terms with almost dying like she had before, right? She does mention that nothing has been in her life, that this has been something that she's been struggling with for a long time, and that what kept nothing at bay was Owen.
Right.
So what's your take on nothing?
So when I look at this, I'm choosing to believe that what we're presented with here is what I've referred to in our show notes and our social media post as all capital letters, nothing. Like it's a proper name, almost like what was it, Never Ending Story, right? The nothing is coming. So from this moment for a little while, when I say nothing, I'm referring to like a character. Nothing is a thing. So they create this character of nothing that is essentially death incarnate. And we get this really twisted tale of a deity of sorts trying to get the one who got away. Right. It's almost like in Hellblazer, how Satan's always after Constantine because he came back after committing suicide. Right. So it's the same thing. So what we end up with here is this idea, because you're right. She has this suicide note. You were right. There is nothing. Nothing is out to get you. You're safe now. So the interpretation that I'm choosing to look at that is, you're right. There is nothing. Like there's a thing that is the nothing, and it is out to get you. And so you get this really bizarre idea of a man who's willing to do whatever it takes to keep his wife safe. And even if what it takes is to become a serial killer. And not just because he kind of discovers it, but we come to find out that nothing has been whispering in his ear to try to get him to kill Beth, trying to get Owen to kill Beth. And so the assumption here is that because of her brush with nothing, that nothing can't just reach out and grab her. It has to either send somebody else, or it has to break her first, because she's come face to face with it and she's won. So you're put into this position where this, to use a Piers Anthony term, this incarnation of immortality, the idea of death as a thing, as a person, is now powerless in the face of the living, breathing person. And that's so bizarre. And that's this insane kind of power that you often don't imagine. Like, even if when you picture the four horsemen, you got war and you got death, and they just sweep in on horses and they're just wreaking havoc because nothing can get in their way. And yet this woman who probably weighs $140 soaking wet, death can't touch her. And so he goes through her husband. And so you've got Owen, who thinks he's having these urges, is what he tells their groundskeeper, I guess, is what he was.
I think he's a neighbor.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Maybe just a neighbor. That does
Yeah.
seem. Yeah. And so he tells me he's having these urges. He doesn't know what it is, but he has an idea. But if Twitter has taught us anything, it's that men will literally do anything other than go to therapy, right?
Right.
So so what does he do? He's like, oh, fuck it. Like, this voice in my head wants me to kill my wife. I'm just going to kill everyone I can find who looks like my wife. And you know what? I might fuck him first. Because, I mean, like.
Yeah, because why not?
Yeah, because why not? Who are they going to tell? So. But so you get this, it's like, on the one hand, it's this really sweet thing. But then on the other hand, it's like, oh man, that's drastic, right? Like, it seems like you could have talked to your wife about that and maybe come to terms with something. But it's this idea that one, she's more powerful than death, and two, the idea that he can trick death, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that he can keep nothing on its heels, because based on the books, he does seem to have a pretty good idea of what his plan is. It's not like he just wants to kill his wife, so he's killing people who looks like his wife. It's not a I kill everyone who looks like my mom type thing. Right. He is actively trying to protect her. So you try to find this weird chivalric, is that a word?
Chivalrous.
Thank you. You try to find
but
this
I do like chivalric.
Yeah, chivalric. That's what we're going with.
Yeah.
So you try to find this weird chivalrous sheen to his murders, and it can be tough to do. But if there's anything we can do here, it's we can take some big steps. And I get it. I get what he was after. And if your interpretation of this is the fact that the nothing is real and it's an entity, then I think that what you've got here is a character that's terrifying in the fact that he can cause he can drive what seems to be a sane man to become a serial killer. But at the same time, it also creates one of the most very subtly creates one of the most powerful female protagonists we've had to date.
Yeah, I think so. I'm glad that this is the route that you took, because I think that if I'm leaning in any one direction, it is towards nothing not being a sort of deity, a demon, what have you, that is the embodiment of death. But I think I'm leaning towards nothing being the embodiment of mental health or mental unhealth, right? I think that nothing is different for everyone.
Okay.
And I think that this movie does not need a sequel. But if they wanted to make a sequel to this, they could really explore different aspects of what nothing does to people based on what that person's personality and what that person's psychology is. Because if you ask me, and I am not a psychologist, right? But I am a guy with a podcast, so I'm going to speak my mind, right?
Joe Rogan makes millions.
I mean, yeah, I was going to say, if Joe Rogan can say whatever he wants to say on his podcast, I can certainly say it here. So what's going on with Owen, like, he's clearly got, like, whether it's schizophrenia or like borderline personality disorder, like, he's got two separate lives, and one of those lives is incredibly violent.
Yeah. And
he's trying as best as he can without the therapy that he so desperately needs, right? So he's trying as much as he can to not let one life impact the other.
Right.
And of course, whenever you do that, you will inevitably bleed from one to the other. And this is what happens, right? He can't handle it anymore, and so he kills himself, right? To me, nothing for him was that. It was him trying to keep his mental illness hidden from his wife, who he knew had suffered with depression from very early on. For her, nothing is depression. She says that he had kept the depression at bay.
Right. Like that was her shit, is what she said. And yeah.
Yeah. And now that he's gone, she has to face her depression again because she was self-medicating with him. Right. And
I didn't think about the fact that when he's gone, now she has to be face to face with it.
Right.
Okay.
And this is not something that is, I think, controversial or new. People who suffer with whether it's addiction or some sort of disorder, something that is an imbalance, right? Oftentimes you'll hyperfixate on something to keep your mind off that other thing.
Right.
And she clearly was using Owen as that fixation. And once he's gone, now there's nothing to take her mind off that depressive state that she constantly has. So that's what I think nothing is for her. And as time goes on, it only gets worse and worse and worse until she feels trapped in this depression, where she feels trapped in her home. She's not leaving anywhere. Little by little, she stops hanging out with people, right?
Yeah.
And you'll find that oftentimes people who are clinically depressed, like they even have a hard time getting out of bed.
Yeah.
And so this is something that I think we see to the point where she doesn't want to be alive anymore, and her depression has led to this attempt at suicide, right? Or pondering suicide in much the same way that he had, until Claire arrives, just in the nick of time to remind her there are people who care about you. There is an outside world, because people who suffer with depression, it's not like you can just remind them and say, hey, we're good. We're here for you. There needs to be a constant, it's constant work.
Yeah.
To bring them back from the edge. So I think that I'm leaning towards that, which is obviously a little more out there. It's a little esoteric, but and maybe I'm just talking out my ass here, but I kind of like that, because I think it elevates the movie a little bit more, and it keeps it grounded in a reality that we often don't get in movies,
right?
Of this kind, because it is a haunting, but she's haunting herself.
Yeah. I mean, and when you look at it from that angle of this idea of it being some sort of clinical, like you said, an imbalance, then the idea of Owen murdering and understanding that there's nothing, her being haunted and feeling that there's nothing, that makes a lot of sense. And like, I think it's real easy to discredit that by saying, well, what about the things she saw and heard? But I think that if you're fixated on the fact that she's seeing and hearing things and you can't get past that as a reason, then I think that you don't understand that what we're talking about here is clinical depression, not having a shitty day and being sad.
Right.
And so I think that you've got a really good point there in the fact that, like, because you also have to remember that every time she would experience something, that quickly we'd cut to her waking up. Right. And so, and she even said, oh yeah, Owen used to sleepwalk. Am I sleepwalking? And her friends are like, maybe it's sleep paralysis. And she's like, it's the opposite of sleep paralysis. My body's awake and I'm doing these things. And I think that those fugue state type things are situations that somebody who's never known somebody or experienced any sort of clinical depression or mania that can really kind of wrap their head around. I've had moments where I've had periods of time where I was really down, but I've never like had these moments where I kind of felt like everything was gone, and I would be like, maybe I'm clinically depressed. And so when I watch something like this and I look at all the trauma in this woman's life, I think it's easy to forget how horrifying that all can be and create these other situations. And so I like that you're pointing out that angle of it, because you're right. It elevates it. That's another level to this movie, especially down to that very last scene where she's sitting there after before she even gets rescued. There's a moment where she's sitting in the boat with what she spends a majority of the movie thinking is the ghost of Owen. Eventually finds out, it's nothing. And she, for a brief moment, hears not Kristen Bell call her name. And she turns her head, and what does nothing say? There's no one there. Yeah. There's not there is only nothing. And so,
which is what your depression tells you.
Which is what your depression tells you, right? Like I have known some people who, they go through this and they suddenly not only question whether or not like emotional attachments they have to even family exist, but they're thrown into this spiral of, what if everyone around me is just bullshitting me? And so your depression, like that moment was the moment where I was like, okay, I can see the clinical side of this, because if you were about to kill yourself and you were down that deep into it, that's what the voice in your head is going to say. If that phone rings and it's a friend who's worried about you, and you see that number, that voice in your head is going to, don't answer that. They don't care about you. That's the type of thing I would imagine you're going to go through. And they put that to film just expertly. And then that final moment of she's sitting there with the neighbor, Mel, I think his name was
Mel. Yeah.
Yeah. And he says, there's nothing there. And what do we get? Yeah. We get this picture of the boat with this very faint, just darkness, just sitting in it. And what is a better representation of a mental health imbalance than just an indefinable, indescribable darkness?
Which she sees very often throughout the house, and she sees it everywhere. It's in the shapes in the house, right? And of course, it's established that Owen was an architect, and that he was, reading up on different forms of, ritual and design and all this sort of stuff that could go into a building. Very, very Ghostbusters, right?
Very, very Ghostbusters, yes.
Yeah. But I think that what it really is that she sees nothing everywhere. Wherever she goes, there is that lack of connection. There is that depression that's riding shotgun with her.
And I think that when we build to that scene where she finally confronts nothing, and we hear nothing's voice, and when we finally get to that, they so expertly build to that moment in the fact that every time we see nothing before, there's my daughter in the background. Yeah, you're on the internet now. You're welcome. So they so expertly build to that confrontation with nothing. In every time you see nothing, it's a negative space gag. There's the head turns, but then she moves, and you're right, it's a shape in the architecture. It's a shadow in the glass. That makes it a lot easier to be a your mind's playing tricks on you type thing. And by the time we actually hear nothing's voice and there's a face-to-face with them, she's broken at that point. She is done. She has just discovered that her husband has murdered all of these women. She's found the bodies, and there were bodies, boy. Yeah. Like that. I mean, like that wasn't like, oops, I put one girl under the floorboards. I mean, that was a mass grave. Right?
That's an oops. Yeah.
Look, one girl under the floorboards, that's an oopsie daisy. All right. That's an oopsie daisy. it happens, and I gotcha. You know, but
he did not learn from his mistakes.
No. His thirst, as it were not quenched. And so, but it's so great, and it's so scary. Like the one where it's kind of, it's like a bend in like a pillar, and the door. The first time when it's really obvious that. Well, it's really obvious that it's not obvious, if that makes any sense, right? Like it's, oh, okay, it's architecture. So did something turn its head in that? Those negative space builds to what nothing is, were those, man, those were genius. Like every one of those shots, especially because it so seamlessly shifted the camera just enough to be like, oh shit, it's a bookshelf. Weird. I thought I saw a head turn. And so that all plays into that other element of nothing being just a mental illness factor. But since you said it at the top of your thing, I'm fascinated by this idea of the fact that that nothing is different for everyone, because I was so latched on to this idea that it was either depression or an embodiment of death. The fact that Owen had his own nothing, that's blowing me away, man. Like the darkness that was in him is his own personal nothing. And so she said he didn't believe in that. And he had just started to, right? That she had just started to kind of convince him. And so like, there's when you look at it from that angle and you talk about the things that Beth said, this is all just kind of setting into me. She said that she would talk to him about how there was nothing after. When you start to look at it from that angle, you start to wonder if her constant idea of there being nothing led to Ben's break. Not that it would be anybody else's fault that he murdered, right? But if she's constantly just talking about how there's nothing, and that's and you know, his brain is twisting, and his nothing are these urges he has. You know, how many times is somebody going to remind you that all this shit is worthless? Like, this is all for you, before you're just like, well, then why am I not just killing people? You know, because that's what my brain is telling me to do.
Giving into these urges.
Yeah, like, because I like, that's what's going to make me happy. Like, dude, that is like a whole nother level that I did not like. I'm writing, I'm like, yeah, it's depression. Let Dave see these fucking notes. I'm gonna blow his goddamn mind. But your recovery right cross on that was genius, man. I love that idea so much. Like
what I love about when nothing has her totally in its grasp, and she's locked in the I guess essentially the upside down, right? The
mirror
reverse
house.
The mirror house. Yeah. Is everything that she sees is Owen's nothing. She sees all of his stuff, because this is what has led her down this rabbit hole. This is what is like making her believe that she is alone. That the one thing that mattered to her most, Owen, was in fact nothing.
Yeah. And it really makes it more powerful, that moment where her friend is like, the Owen that you love, the Owen that you knew, that's who you need to remember, and go forward with that. Because if she had taken that advice, instead of giving in to those whispers of the nothing in her ear, where she had to know more, then she wouldn't have reached that point. Because we talked about how your depression is going to talk to you and tell you that nobody matters, or that nobody cares about you. But for it to talk to you and also convince you that the one person that you genuinely believed in was worthless, like that's a whole nother level to what nothing can do.
We see this. I mean, I think that this is something that's going on right now. Similar situation where, like the holiest of holies for the United States, our founding fathers, and this, like, they were the untouchables. You could not say a single negative word about these men. And now that we have started to turn our modern eye on them, Thomas Jefferson being who he was and everything that he did, Declaration of Independence aside, diplomacy aside, right? Was he a good person? And so you kind of have to make that decision. Am I going to look at this person as the person that I remember him or her being, or am I going to look at everything? Because if I do, that's a rabbit hole I can't come back from.
And speaking of that rabbit hole, tune in Friday for our new podcast, Shitting on the Forefathers.
And before I get canceled by the right wing, here's our number one fan. That's true. Our number one fan, Frank Kowalski. It's also important to highlight how she didn't notice her husband going through these things until he died. That's a great point, because I think that she was forcing herself not to see these things, because her friend asks her, "Did you really not know?"
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that is a masterful point, because when you've only got one thing that's your ground, you're constant, right? And what when you decide, when you discover, when you figure out what your constant is, then that person, that thing is going to be flawless, and it's going to be easy to ignore those things. And I think that you're absolutely right, Frank. That's such a good point, because she was very, very aware that Owen was her tether to not only a happy life, but we come to see her tether to reality. This nothing that she experienced when she was a kid and died for 4 minutes. It threatened her every day to engulf her life, to take everything from her. And Owen was all she had. So, like you said, with the forefathers, okay, well, you know what? Hold on. Get away from your forefathers. When you're a kid, your parents, even though you're mad at them, like everything they do, like, man, when you're a boy, like everything your dad does is like superhuman, right? Yeah. You like, I remember,
Superman.
Yeah, like I remember watching my dad like put in a tile floor and be like, yeah, who else's fucking dad can do this? Get out of here. My dad putting in tiles, right? And I was 8 or 9, but
you work in an elementary school. How many times have you heard my dad can kick your dad's ass?
Yeah, like that's, and so like, keeping it there, because that's who you have. Like your parents, that's your world when you're a kid. So you don't see all these things. You eventually reach a point where you're like, oh, well, sure, I can install tile now. There's really nothing to it. I actually can't. All cards on the table. Never installed tile. Did put in a laminate floor a couple of times. But it's like and like you said, looking back at the forefathers, when you get removed from these things, and it was she got removed from Owen before she could see it.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot here. And so for this next little bit, we're just going to kind of toe the line between these two things. And I want to look at something that I got really excited about while watching the movie. And I don't want to say I was disappointed afterwards when I went to do my research, but it didn't lead to where I thought it would. And that is this idea that the Nighthouse tries something that's risky, because they introduce these real life things like Cara Droya and the Louvre voodoo doll. These are very real things, but what they do is they create their own mythos. Like just kind of FYI, if you've seen this and not done any research, the Cara Droya are Welsh. Maze is almost the wrong word, because the walls are never broken. You can't actually get lost in it, but it's essentially a Welsh labyrinth. But there is no deeper mythology to them. But what they do is they take these real things, and the Louvre voodoo doll, the one that he has a replica of there, is a very real thing. It's in the Louvre. They don't know much about it, but it is there. And they attach their own mythos to them. And so, there was one part of me that was like, oh, fuck yeah. Like, I've never even heard about this. Like, let's get into this idea of the maze occult, right? And so I go and I start digging, and I was like, oh, all right, cool. They just kind of made it their own thing. But so, I mean, does that work? Did you believe what was presented to us about the mythos created within the Nighthouse? Like, did it add to the scary, or was it hacky?
Yeah, I think it towed the line well enough where I bought it. Like, I feel like it was explanation enough. And this is where I think there's that ambiguity again, where this can work in one of two ways. It could either be that Owen was really driven by nothing, and so therefore he was looking for ways to conduct these things that he needed to do for nothing to keep Beth safe.
Right.
And so all these things, this experimentation, this learning on what the movie presents as a cult, right, is all for her, and in effect kind of leads him to his own demise, right? But there's another route, because I am leaning towards and prefer the reading of nothing being an embodiment of your personal psychology. I kind of like that he was using this as an excuse to do whatever it was that he wanted to do. But what I'm more interested in is what Beth used it as an excuse for. And this is something that I've seen in my own life. It is very easy for people to look at a physical illness and say, yep, well, that's what it is. He's got cancer, right?
Right.
But it's much more difficult for people to say, well, he's got dementia, or she's got depression, or bipolar disorder, or borderline personality disorder, or you name it, because those things are much less tangible. And because mental health has always taken a backseat to literally every other kind of healthcare in this country.
Yeah, try to get your insurance to pay for some therapy because you're rough. Try to get your insurance pay. If you do not understand what we mean by it taking a backseat, if you have any type of insurance, go try to find a therapist or a psychiatrist who's going to take your insurance, because insurance doesn't pay that shit, because you're absolutely right.
Like, even spiritual health comes before mental health. So a lot of people I have found, and I'm not saying it's most people, but I have found that a lot of people will try to find any possible answer for someone's mental illness.
Yeah.
And they'll say, oh, well, it was because of this, or it was because of that. Well, no, it's because they were fucking sick.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what Beth does. She finds something in his possessions, and she latches onto that to such a degree that she is convinced, absolutely convinced, that this is what drove him to murder these women. And maybe it is, right? Because he was sick himself, right? But for her, this narrative starts to unravel, where he visited this, occult bookstore, and, he flirted with these women, and he seduced them, and he took them back there. I mean, it's possible that he just has a kind that he likes. I certainly have a type, and almost everyone I know has a type.
Fair.
So wouldn't it be, if he was going to seduce, bed, and murder someone, that it would be someone that fits his type?
Yeah. That's damn. Dave, you're killing me this episode, man, and I mean that in the best possible way. I mean it.
Just wait till I show you my mirror house. I've got it out back in the lake.
I mean it. I mean it in with the most love in the world, because fuck, dude, god damn, that's so good. This idea that she needs the nothing to be something physical. She needs these mazes and this murder house to mean something. She needs them to explain why Owen was not just a serial killer. Like that. Fuck. Like I was so latched onto this idea of right. Like I was so latched onto this idea of like, yeah, he built like a mirror house because it's all part of this plan. And I had this whole thing about how I was leaning towards this playing into the mental health aspect of the movie, because I didn't want to believe that an all-powerful, supernatural deity of death could be tricked by just killing the wrong woman because she had the same hair. And now, like, I'm not just leaning that way. Like, I'm standing firmly in your camp, because you're right. Like she needed like we just talked about. Owen was her tether to sanity, to reality. And you can't let that go. Like I said, I am now like I said, I'm now almost 40. I'm taller than my dad. Like I do stuff with my dad all the time that we can both just do. But it's like I still kind of default to him for things, because I do still have I do still have that idea of like, he's my dad. He's going to know what's best. So if her tether was Owen, then she needs something to explain why he did this. It's not just because he was sick. It's not just because his, there was a voice inside his head, but it was just another part of his head telling him to kill these people. Like she needs that. She had, fuck, dude, damn it. Like that's so good. Like I can't believe I didn't think of that. This is what anybody who's watching live, this is my revelation face. Like I just
the glass shattering.
Yeah. Like,
well, and look, this is just
so good.
This is just one possible reading.
Right. And so, okay. So what I was ready to say was like this mirror house is a reverse space and it's going to trick death. But now what I'm thinking is like, this mirror house is just like
I think Kowalski feels how you do.
There it is. Kowalski,
he put the ghost face
emoji. Yeah. I mean, so like I said, what I wanted to say was, oh, well, it's a mirror house. It's a flipped floor plan. It's all part of this maze and confusion. The highlight in the book was like, it said decoys, deception, and trickery. Yeah. It's all part of that. But what if the decoys, that the house itself is a decoy, the deception and trickery are like, hey, baby, let me show you this other lake house I'm building. And it's not about tricking the nothing into thinking that he's actually killed his wife. It's just about creating a space where these women feel comfortable enough for you to get close enough to kill them. Your moment right here has completely flipped everything I was. I am now in the. I'm now in the mirrored floor plan of. I'm now in my mirrored game plan for how I was going to attack this bullet point, because now all I can think is that the fact that he was focused on deception and trickery and stuff like that is just because it was always about hunting for him. And I am now like completely moving over into this idea that, not that I ever considered Owen a hero. Like I said, I was just willing to make those steps to think that what he did was chivalrous in a fucked up way. Like now I think I'm almost completely out of that camp and into this idea that it's like Owen is the ultimate villain here, whose nothing just triggered what was terrible about Beth's. And like the voodoo and stuff like that, that was all just your idea of Beth buying into it because she needed that. but there's also this really amazing, like this really dark idea of him justifying it to himself, right? Doing all that research because he understood that his nothing was a darkness, and the only way he could satiate it with a clean conscience and still live his life was to do all this research into deception, trickery, and lies, and create a scenario where what he was doing was chivalrous. And we reach another point where, fuck,
I like that.
like, yeah, like this is now so much more character driven than I even realized. And at first I was like, it's 98% character driven. Like
it's basically two actors for the majority of the movie. It's her and Owen. And we get Claire and we get Mel.
And it's just Owen's presence to an extent. Like the idea of Owen is so strong. God, shit, that was awesome. God, that was good. I love this podcast so fucking much. Like that was spectacular. Yeah, fuck it. Now, oh shit. So here we go.
Not one complete thought there.
Again, not a single fucking one. Revelation face. So the way I presented this topic was the idea that the Nighthouse presented real life source material and presented it as mythos. But what if what we're actually looking here is real life source material that is in no way presented as mythos, but what we are given is one character's attempt at creating a mythos? What if what we have, have here is not the creators of the Nighthouse saying, here's what Kyrodroya and voodoo dolls are about? What if what we have here are the creators of the Nighthouse saying, your nothing, your darkness can be so deep that you will personally create a headcanon that justifies serial murder. And so
as serial killers often do.
Right. And so we don't have the creators of the film trying to convince us that this is real. We have a guy whose head is so beyond repair that he had to personally create it. And then his widow had to accept it or else lose what little bit she had left, which was only her own life. That's next level. David Bruckner, I love it. If that's what you meant, God bless you.
That's brilliant.
That's brilliant. Wow.
That's absolutely brilliant.
Hell yes. That's why we work it out here, folks. Welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast.
So you mentioned character driven, and that leads to our next topic of discussion. And I think it's an important one because this is undoubtedly horror. But
right.
That said, there's an awful lot of drama here.
Yes.
This is a psychological thriller as much as it is horror. It's drama as much as it is horror. And so we've got a very small cast here. We're not working with an extensive cast. This isn't Scream, where you've got like 10 main players.
Yeah.
We've got one woman who basically carries 75% of this movie herself. And then we've got Owen, we've got Claire, and we've got Mel. Yep. So how does this work for you? The actors, firstly, and the characters, secondly. Is this something that you buy into?
So when you look at actors first, I think there's really only two actors that I think you've got to really look at. And that is, you've got to look at Rebecca Hall as Beth. Obviously, her performance here was, and I'm right on the fence about saying this. So I'm going to spit it out there. I'm going to say it was on par with Toni Collette in Hereditary. Like,
wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
like she and I've been back and forth about whether or not I was going to say it that way, but I do think that the way she shouldered this movie and took us through, I don't think that we got some of the I don't think we got as much of the dramatic part, that the pain that Toni Collette experienced in Hereditary.
Mhm.
You know, we never really got that as much. But her ability to carry this movie and keep it tense and keep my eyes glued to the screen, I think that she killed that. She had this amazing ability to go from like lovable, kind of like empathetic widow to like bitch, but for the right reason. Like I don't say bitch in a derogatory way. I mean, like she had this amazing, when she confronts the woman that she is now convinced
She's head on.
that Owen had an
She's
affair
very
with.
assertive.
I mean, and like I said, and like there was a moment where she goes, you can stop calling him you can stop calling him my husband. He wasn't my husband when you were fucking him, right? And it's like,
right.
Okay, like I see you, right? Like,
and you know, that's another character I didn't mention, but I think she did a fantastic job.
Oh yeah, Madeline. Yeah, that like, but so she, I mean, she put this movie on her shoulders, and we get to see her at her angriest when she's tearing up stuff in the basement, because now she's convinced he had an affair after she finds more pictures on his computer. Like, he's had multiple affairs. But we get to see her at her most vulnerable when she reaches a moment where she has forgiven all of that, because she's convinced that standing right in front of her is Owen, and she just can't see him. And that slide from hating him to just being so comforted by the fact that he's there, like, that's fucking range.
Yeah.
Like, that moment when she's sitting in the bathroom floor and she's just pleading with this presence that she feels in her house that she's convinced is Owen to talk to her, and she sees here in the mirror. And then she goes in the bathroom and there's the wet footprints, and they do this amazing job of like showing like a hand is moving up her skin. Just, and there's an embrace, and she's so vulnerable in that moment. And it comes not long after having like a sit down with Madeline, where now she thinks my husband is a murderer and an adulterer, right?
Yeah.
like she's just come face to face with all of this, and in that moment, Owen is all that matters. And again, we're reminded that that's her tether. And that goes a little bit more toward to characters, because we talked about, the actor who played Owen's barely in the movie, but the character of Owen. But just looking at Beth and that actress who was also in Iron Man 3, and that drove me crazy for a while. Until
she's been in quite a few movies, actually. I was like, man, where do I know her from? I'm sure I've seen her somewhere else. And then I was like, oh no, I've seen her in like a ton of other things. Because she was also in The Town. I think that's probably what she's most well known for.
Oh yeah,
yeah. She was in The Town. She was in the newest Godzilla and King Kong movie.
Kong and Kong versus Godzilla.
Yeah, The Prestige.
But she, oh fuck, I love that movie. Is that horror?
Yeah.
Can we do that one? So
close enough.
But Rebecca Hall brought so much range to this character of Beth that and sometimes it happened so quickly that it felt raw and it felt real. Like we've all been in situations where you're mad at someone you love, and you're maybe not because they're a murderer, I hope. And but you get those moments where you're so fucking angry. You're so angry at somebody, and you love them, but then an embrace or a word or a look, and you're right back there. And she brought that to the screen so beautifully. And one time in the scene, literally by herself, it was incredible. It was, and that's why when I made the show notes, like I made sure that I wanted to mention characters and actors separately because she does kind of the opposite. Like the actor who plays her does the opposite of what the character of Owen does, which is she's so present and so powerful that you can't take your eyes off because she is the movie, and it was amazing.
I have to agree with everything. I'm not going to add much more to that. I think that what I will add is the characters were incredibly realistic the way that they were written. They did not go for camp. They didn't go for over the top. And if there's a supernatural element to this movie, what tethers this movie to the real world is the characters. They're all very normal people, very average people. And I think that the emotions that we see them go through are emotions that just about everyone has been through in their life if you're of a certain age.
Yeah.
And I think that the way it was casted was absolutely brilliant. I will say that there was one moment, or a couple of moments actually, where I expected Claire to say that she and Owen had been having an affair.
Right.
And of course he was having an affair with, multiple women. But she's alive. So
Right. Well, and that would, like that's another side to that coin of telling her not to dig any deeper, right? Like there's the good friend side who knows that this could unravel you, but then there's also the I fucked your husband side that's like, please stop before you find a picture of me on his computer.
Right. And that's what I was thinking. I was like, well,
Yeah.
she doesn't want her to find the evidence of what she and Owen were doing. And then in the end, like, she's just a really good friend, and she was
Yeah.
looking out for her well-being. And I think that she played that wonderfully. And in real life, I think we have that as well, where someone tells you, well, hey, listen, you don't want to go digging. And it's not because they're involved in what you're digging. It's just that they're trying to protect you because they know you're going to find something that you're not going to like.
Right.
And that's it's an exercise in futility. Why burden yourself with this knowledge?
Yeah.
Well, maybe you need to. Maybe you feel you need to for your own well-being, and no one knows that but you. I can very well say, hey, don't do this. But if you know you really need to do this, well, then you're going to do it.
Yeah. I think, and as we shift to talking about characters, that this is probably the first time in at least a while, like there's this idea in Hereditary that that Paimon was an ever-present character. But this concept of one of the most important characters being a presence is done amazingly well. Like it would have
Pazuzu in The Exorcist.
There we go. Right. Like, which, by the way, if you're not a Futurama fan, there's a moment in Futurama where you find out that like Professor Farnsworth's pet gargoyle is named Pazuzu. And like, and as a Futurama and a horror movie fan, like it's like the dumbest gag ever. And it makes me laugh so hard every time. Anyway. But so this concept, this idea from a filmmaking perspective of how do we make something that you can only feel present, right? Like how do we make it an important character? And they did that in spades.
Yeah.
They do this, they do the real obvious thing is like, oh, he turns on the radio and he always plays the song from their wedding and stuff like that. But like the little things where even when nothing is actually happening, from the supernatural element of things, like she's not seeing things or hearing things, Ben is Owen is
Mhm.
omnipresent in this movie, because even when she's
Were
at
you always looking for him?
yes, constantly.
Constantly. Yeah.
Yes. Like there
He's
were
there. He's there,
yes,
and he's not there
like
because
there
he's
were
here. He's in
there
your mind.
right. There were moments where I was like, I would kind of realize I was listening and I was paying attention, but I would realize that I didn't have a focal point on the screen because I was trying to make sure I could see everything because of exactly that. He's always there. She's in the bookstore. Nothing supernatural is happening, but you see the girl walk by, and Owen's there because that's the girl. That's the girl from the phone. Owen's the reason I'm here. Owen's the reason I need to confront her. Owen is here. I often, when we're making this podcast, am just amazed at the way that a filmmaker or a film writer's brain can work to create these instances. And this is one where I feel like I could spend the rest of my life with Microsoft Word open and trying to write something, and never write something where someone you couldn't see was on screen at all times. And I think that is the key to this movie, is the fact that Owen is always there.
Frank says, I looked everywhere. Hereditary taught me always to check the background. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Mike Flanagan.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was gonna say. That is an Ari Aster thing. He loves to drop little things here and there. There's always something going on the screen. But that's also a Mike Flanagan thing. And I think one of the brilliant things that was done in this movie was the very first time that we see nothing is in the reflection of the door.
Yes.
And you're kind of looking and you're like, is someone there? Is something there? And all you see is like what might have been headlights on the road.
Yes.
But it turns into eyes, what could be eyes. And I was like, that was a Mike Flanagan level fuck with my head right there.
Yes.
That mind fuck was on Mike Flanagan's level of like, holy shit. And because that was done so early in the movie, I kept looking for it all over the place. And what's beautiful about Nothing is that when nothing was there, it was amazing and it was terrifying. And when nothing was there, nothing was there.
Nothing was. It's
brilliant.
Yeah, like we if you're not following us on Instagram, follow us at Shiver Pod. We posted a thing recently where Turner Classic Movies released a scientific, if you're not watching, I'm doing air quotes, study on what are the scariest movies, and it's because they did it based strictly on average beats per minute, making people wear heart monitors while they do this. We've talked about this before on the podcast, and the newest one says The Host, which I think is a pretty scary movie. I don't know if it's the scariest movie of all time. It ranks number one because it has the highest BPM. What's amazing about that gag, and just by the way, if I've never actually said it on this podcast, I just use the word gag for like any sort of visual thing that's meant to draw an effect. Like I don't just use it to mean something funny, just in case anybody's listening who's wondering why I call it a gag. So when you see that shadow figure in the door gag, what's amazing about that is my heart stopped. Like it didn't beat faster. Like there was like a 3/4, a full second there where I was unable to breathe because
you have to remind yourself to do it again.
And because that was so subtly scary that it was fucking horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
But like ever since we posted that thing on our Instagram all night long, like I'd be looking at I've got a watch that does my beats per minute, right? And I'd be looking at it, like, oh, apparently that wasn't that scary. I felt scared, so I think that in that moment was where I fully became convinced that obviously that's not a metric for just how scary something is, because that was so fucking scary. And like I said, I even kind of just said to myself, I was like, my heart's not racing, but I'm horrified right now. Like that was very scary. And you're right. It was so subtle and so beautiful in the way they did it, because it didn't change that much. And nothing was there until nothing was there. Right. And it's so beautifully done. Like the technical aspects of that Bruckner brought to this were man, Ari Aster, like Mike Flanagan, like it's that level.
It's on that
good.
level.
Yeah.
I agree.
So we are getting to the end here, and it is about time for us to rate this movie. Now, if you're new to the podcast or if you're just listening, we'd like to remind you that we only rate a movie against itself, because it's not fair to rate all movies against each other. So what we do is we create a unique rating system for each movie. We've kicked around a couple different ones. My initial thought was I was going to go like super obscure, like 15-second scene in this, but I'm not. I'm going to bail off that, and I'm going to go with what is the obvious one. But because now everything that's been revealed about this idea of their mythos has blown me away so much that we're going to go with what's the pretty obvious one here. And Dave, out of a possible 5 mirror houses, reverse houses, backwards houses, whatever you want to call them, what do you give the Nighthouse?
Initially I was thinking, great technical filmmaking, check. Great use of music, check. Great acting, check. Great story writing, check. And then the only thing I was thinking was, the ambiguity of what nothing is leaves this to be a somewhat confusing film. And I didn't know whether I liked that. And now that we've talked about it a little more, I really like that. I really like that there is no definitive answer as to what that is. And I don't see that as something that could be a potential negative anymore. If anything, it's great, because we just spent the better part of an hour talking about just that.
Yeah. Talking about stuff that wasn't in the movie, right?
Like just it's in the movie, but it's not in the movie. And that's, to me, I mean, that's a success. If your film incites such great conversation on theme, on story, right? Where you don't have to get bogged down in the plot. Like, we almost never mentioned the actual plot of this movie.
Yeah.
Because it's totally irrelevant. It's inconsequential. What is important is the story, is what's going on. And I think that for that, it's fucking brilliant. And you couple that with the fact that everything else, every other thing that I mentioned was like so great. I take back what I said earlier, that this flirts with elevated horror. It doesn't flirt with it at all. It takes it back home and rocks its fucking world.
To its real house.
Yeah, to its real house, not to its mirror house. Yeah, so I'm giving this a full 5 mirror houses. This movie has shaken me to my core. I've once it was done, my jaw was on the floor because I didn't quite know what I had seen, but I knew I really, really liked it. And the more I thought about it, and the more we just talked about it now, I fucking love this movie.
Yeah. When I watched this last night, man, like I said, I had this weird roller coaster, because I reached this moment where I was like, oh, like I said at the top, I reached the moment where I was like, oh shit, like I get it. He's killing women that look like her to keep her safe from whatever this demon is that's chasing her. Then they still brought it back, and they brought it around in a way. And so I thought that was going to be points against, much like you, because the ambiguity of what I had just witnessed was weighing on me oddly. And it turns out that it was weighing on me like creepily, and in a way that I hope they meant to present it. After sitting here, you're right. I'm right with you on this one. Like, after sitting here and talking about it, and until you said it, like, I didn't even realize that we very rarely talked to, we weren't like, here's what happened and then it happened, like, because that didn't matter. What we were given here was presented in such a way that you're allowed, you don't feel bad bringing your own interpretation to it. And like some of the like I said, I felt like I was so ready for what I was going to say, but like to be able to sit down 24 hours later and already be given another perspective on some things, and to, if you're watching live, like I said, just that might be the first time that I've ever just had like a full blown, I've had ideas that have developed on the show, but like just a full blown kind of revelation. To be able to sit down 24 hours later and not be watching it again, just talking about it and have that, that's worth plenty of mirror houses. And damn it, if anything, watching a high school teacher basically tell a parent to go fuck themselves for trying to change their kid's grade.
Oh, it was brilliant. That was so brilliant.
Has got to be worth a whole fucking star, right? Because like Dave and I are both teachers, and we, without naming names, could probably give you a roundabout ballpark figure of how many times we've wanted to look a parent in the face and tell them to go fuck themselves for different reasons. Dave because of grades, I'm sure. Me because sometimes kids are just assholes, and I can't tell parents their kids are assholes. But so
I had to stop myself from doing that today, man.
So like I said, all of that other stuff coupled with the fact that I got a cathartic moment in watching not only a teacher tell a parent to go fuck themselves, but do it so rightfully and so justfully that the parent had to sit there and eat that shit sandwich.
Yeah. How's that taste?
Yes. This is 5 Mirror Houses. This movie, I don't know how it flew under the radar. And maybe it's just, maybe like, I know I don't have cable, but I spend enough time online and frequenting things that I feel like I should have heard about this movie coming out last year, and I completely missed it. And so I'm so happy. HBO Max, sponsor us. We love you for recommending this to us.
Yeah.
This was such a great rec and such an amazing way to kick off our month of movies that are new to both of us. Man, yeah, this is 5 Mirror Houses. I mean, sew it up, done deal. This thing was a blast.
Absolutely. And good to know that we're not alone. Mr. Kowalski also gives this 5 out of 5 Mirror Houses. He says, I also like the ambiguity, makes it a great movie to converse about. The ambiguity reminded me a lot of The Thing. I know The Thing is your favorite movie. And you're right. That kind of open-endedness in The Thing is part of what makes it so scary. And I think that that's part of what makes this so scary. This idea of death coming towards you, that is scary. But it is something that we've seen done before in the Final Destination series. This, I think, is something new if you approach it from the angle that this is your own personal mental health that is stalking you.
Or even if you approach it from the angle of the fact that the nothing, that death is this supernatural entity that's going to come to you. The idea that it has to break you down mentally and make you kill yourself is far more frightening than the idea that it will just drop a giant pane of glass on you and smash you, which is a dope effect, but not nearly as scary as the idea of an omniscient being breaking you and the ones you love until you kill yourself.
Yeah, because otherwise I think it does become a little derivative of Final Destination. It's just less slashery.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to think of it that way. And I don't think that that's what was intended.
I'm with. I started this episode in the supernatural camp, and I'm not there anymore. I burned that motherfucker to the ground, and I'm straight up in the. This is like a, which by the way, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So
there you go.
And that one just kind of happened, but there we go. Look at us staying on topic. So I mean, no, I'm totally with you.
And here I was thinking I was on topic, wearing an Empire Strikes Back baseball cap on May the 4th.
It is May the 4th, isn't it?
Yeah. So there you have it. 5 out of 5 Mirror Houses for The Nighthouse. If you enjoyed this episode, and even if you didn't, make sure that you subscribe, because it helps us out, right? I'm sure somewhere. I mean, people say that, so I'm sure it does. I
Yeah.
don't know how though. But subscribe on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, Podbean, wherever it is that you receive your podcasts. Make sure to look out for the other Geek Bro Network podcasts, show like Mount Geekmore, like What's Up Bro, Better Let Me Tell You, Seasons, a TV podcast, Dose of Ellie, Comedy Fitness, Kick Flicks, and our sister show, Crimacopia.
Also, make sure you head over to TeePublic, where if you do a search for Geek Bro, you can order gear with all of the shows that Dave just mentioned's logo on them, including our amazing Shiver logo that you can check out right up here. Things a piece of beauty, and you can put it on just about anything. So make sure Dave's trying to figure out how to point to it. I'll give it to you.
I can't use my other hand because my dog climbed into my arms at the very beginning of the show. And
she's been there the whole time?
The whole time. It's my wife's Chihuahua, and she sucks. This is the one I'm always having to quiet
That's
down.
the one you have to mute your mic for all the time.
Yes. Yeah. And so she was quiet, and I was like, all right, fine. So she's just been here the whole time. So say hi.
But yeah, so make sure you check us out on TeePublic. Also, like I said earlier, all of our social media is at Shiver Pod. We've had some great interactions with some people lately. The Turner Classic Movies, Scariest Movies of All Time thing pulled some great responses. We've slowly been meeting a lot of people out there in the horror family on Instagram. Our Instagram is growing every day. If you're listening, if you're watching and you started following us, you're liking our post. We really appreciate that. And we're trying to return the love. We love you all so much. Thank you so much. It's, man, like we're starting to reach a lot of people. But if you still have not left us a review on Spotify or at least a ranking, hit up there and give us some stars. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. We are on all Shiver media. We are on all social media at Shiver Pod. Shiver Media. That's what ours is called.
We are on Shiver Media as well. So we will be back next week with another movie that neither Daniel nor I have seen, Fresh, which you can find on Hulu, I believe.
Starring Sebastian Stan, the Winter Soldier himself.
The Winter Soldier.
Also
Tommy
Lee.
Yeah. So that one should prove to be interesting. So on behalf of all of us here at Shiver,